I realize you can build a whole world on top of a lie. You can build an entire life or relationship or religion on a lie. It happens in big and small ways. I can remember a time when I was in my late teens or early 20s when I was somewhere, I can't remember where, and there was this gorgeous woman standing with some friends across the room from me. And after a while, I noticed that she kept looking at me. Seriously, she could barely help but keep her eyes off of me. Now keep in mind, this was the most beautiful woman in the whole place. And I was feeling pretty good at that moment. This was not by any means a normal experience for me. I was an awkward kid growing up most of the time, but with this undiscovered Miss America looking at me like that, I started feeling pretty good about myself. Now, I know I should be saying that it was her brains I was attracted to, but I have a covenant with you to keep it real. Anyway, I was scanning the room and looking around at the other guys and thinking, well, I'm the dude. That was until I realized that she was actually making eyes at the guy who was sitting just behind me. But for that brief moment, I was Casanova in my own mind. It was a beautiful moment while it lasted. The point is that we have misperceptions and misunderstandings all the time, and until we realize it, as far as we know, it's the truth. They say perception is 90% of reality. And that's why we are all, almost always, in a trance of some sort. If your father told you you'll never amount to anything, then you may have lived with that self-understanding for a long time. Even if it wasn't true. Maybe you still do. Until something breaks the spell and you realize that you matter. Or if someone tells you that from the time you're young that your religion is the one and only right one, you can go around looking at other people and other faiths and feel sorry for them and feel better than them. Poor guy believes his false scripture and that false prophet. Poor elderly lady, God doesn't recognize her prayers because she doesn't use the right name for God. You can think. And if the world tells you you have the wrong hips or lips or hair or complexion, it can become your reality if you believe it. Or if the world tells you you have the right hips and lips and hair and complexion, you can believe that too. So let's look at the foundational story of the dominant religion of Western society that is also one of the fastest growing religious ideologies in the southern hemisphere of the world right now. It begins with the idea that God created Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. It says in the Bible in Genesis chapters 2 and 3, God took the man and he put him into the Garden of Eden and commanded the man, you are free to eat from any of the trees in the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat from it, you will certainly die. It's pretty clear. One rule. That's all they need to follow. Then God said, it's not good for man to be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him. There's two versions of the Adam and Eve story. In the first chapter, they were created together, both of them. In the second chapter, first Adam was created and then Eve out of his rib. So I'm starting here at the second chapter. So God forms out of the ground all of the wild animals and all of the birds, And it says, he brought them to the man one by one, but for Adam no suitable mate was found. Chipmunk, horse, elephant, they just wouldn't do. Finally, God made a woman, and he brought her to the man. They were both naked, and they felt no shame. So all was good, and in fact, getting better in the Garden of Eden. But just then, when it all looked so perfect, a serpent, who it says was more crafty than any of the wild animals God had made, comes and says to the woman, "Did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden?" And the woman replies, "We may eat fruit from the trees in the garden, but God did say you must not eat fruit from the tree that is in the middle of the garden, and you must not touch it, or you will die." She added that last little part. "You will not certainly die," the serpent said to the woman. "For God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." Well, when the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye, and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and ate it. She also gave some to her husband, it says, who was with her, and he ate it. And then it says the eyes of both of them were opened, and they realized that they were naked, or as you say in Oklahoma, naked. I'm still trying to learn how to speak Oklahoman. So they sewed the fig leaves together and they made coverings for themselves. And then the man and his wife heard the sound of God as God was walking in the garden in the cool of the day, it says. And they hid from God among the trees of the garden, but God called to the man, "Where are you?" And he answered, "I heard you in the garden and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid." And he said, "Who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree that I commanded you not to eat from?" You can hear Adam thinking, uh-oh. The man said, "The woman you put here with me, she gave me some fruit from the tree and I ate it." This was the invention of what we call passing the buck. It took about 3 chapters. It's been there from the beginning. To the woman, God said, "I will make your pains in childbearing very severe, and your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you." And here's the biblical origin of male dominance. A lot happened in the garden that day. But let's look at the crux of the matter. Author and minister Debbie Blue writes of this passage I've just shared in her book, From Stone to Living Word. God is not part of the conversation between Adam and Eve and the snake. They are not talking to God, but about God. In fact, they are sitting around talking about God as if God is not there. God is objectified, not conversed with, but defined. God is not a subject in relationship, and as often happens when people are doing that sort of thing, talking about someone behind their back, within about 3 sentences, God starts to look like a completely different character. Instead of lover, creator, life giver, whose greatness is in relationship and is in not being alone, God starts to look like some sort of icky, greedy, rivalrous, petty being, all concerned about being separate. As if God is all about drawing a line to keep humanity away, to keep wisdom and transcendence for God's self. End quote. My point this morning is not to say that all this literally happened and that there were at one time talking snakes and even a Garden of Eden. The point is to show how this story lifts up a fundamental truth. When we start to objectify each other, talking behind one another's backs, talking about each other instead of with each other, we begin to create separation where there is meant to be relationship. It's a story about how the fundamental unity of all life becomes broken by objectification, by acting as if we are anything other than one with each other and with all life, and dare I say, with God. The unity of all things was broken all of a sudden, not by the eating of the apple as much as by the assumption of separateness from God. Immediately, Adam and Eve realize that they are naked and they become ashamed. Whereas before they were united and unaware of these distinctions, suddenly they were separated by them. God says, if you eat the fruit, you will surely die. The snake says, if you eat the fruit, you will become like God. What God will they become like? Blue says it's the God the serpent just made up. The God that does not exist. A God who is absolute and self-sufficient and self-centered. With one flick of the tail, she says, the snake redefines God and good and wise and desirable. If the humans want to be like God, it is a completely false God, an idol. And worshiping that idol, wanting to become like that, sucks life and destroys relationship. In other words, it's death. And the Reverend Blue is right. That instead of seeing in this story the truth that we are all united with each other, with nature, and with God, the spirit of all life, we've created religions that focus on the idea of the separate God, the other God, the self-centered God that the serpent invented. And from that original lie, we have built beliefs that are like fortresses that keep us separate from our human brotherhood and sisterhood across all cultures, from our oneness with nature, and ultimately from our oneness with God, or ultimate reality. Have you ever told a story to try to explain something to someone and they completely missed the point and took it the wrong way? I once saw two sisters who stopped talking to each other for 10 years because one had thought the other one had said something and was deeply offended. It was a complete misunderstanding that kept them separated for a decade for no real reason until one of their children finally got them to talk to one another and they realized what had happened and they came back together. The original lie is that we are and that we can live separate from one another. Yet we have built an enormous worldwide religious system based on the idea that due to the original sin in the Garden of Eden, humanity was tainted by iniquity from birth. And the only way that that sin is to be atoned, it is said, is for God to send his only Son as a blood sacrifice. Now, one of the reasons that fundamentalist Christianity has such a hard time with the idea of evolution is that if the Garden of Eden did not literally happen, then there's no original sin. And if there's no original sin, then the basis they have for why Jesus came and was crucified does not make sense. It also puts a little kink in the rationale for why women must be subservient to men. Belief in evolution could require a lot of people to reimagine the purpose of Jesus and his ministry. But when some people who previously believed in that traditional orthodoxy start to reimagine the role of Jesus, like Bishop Carlton Pearson, they are branded heretics. But if we realize that the original lie was about our separateness, then we begin to understand Jesus' life and ministry not to be about a blood sacrifice, but we begin to see his ministry to be about bringing the human family back together in relationship with each other, with the earth, and with a God of love and forgiveness. The moment a person realizes that they are one with everything, everything changes. Because the end game is love. Love is relationship. Love is feeling so connected that what was other becomes part of you, and you part of them. They become us becomes we, and we become a family. If we could just expose that original lie and help people see the fundamental unity of all life and all existence, imagine what it would do for our relationship to nature. Imagine what it would do for our relationships with one another. But it's hard, because even as I talk about fundamentalism, I am equally in danger of repeating the original sin of objectification. So I need to be clear that I'm sharing this publicly, not so much to define them as other, nor to draw a line that separates as a separation between us, but to invite a conversation and a relationship that's real. Those who know me know that I have deep and abiding relationships with many clergy of many faiths and denominations, including some who consider themselves fundamentalist Christianity and wear that with great pride, and at least one of whom I've brought into this pulpit to have a dialogue and talk to this congregation about. And I do that because ultimately we are one. And that's why we should love our neighbors as ourselves, because our neighbors are an aspect of ourselves. That's why Jesus even told us to love our enemies, because even we and our enemies are one. So I ask you this morning, how can you be an apostle of this truth of oneness? How can you break down the walls of separation in your life and create connections? The work of repairing the world is like the sewing together of a great patchwork quilt. Our job is to help sew our little square of cloth together with others. This week and this summer, I want to challenge you to find ways to sow unity where there is now division, to create relationships where there is now separation. And let's individually and together be missionaries and emissaries of a love that is bigger than any belief. A love that is bolder than any lies. A love that will not stop until the world becomes united like Eden once again. Amen.